Good evening, everybody. Welcome to a slightly later than billed edition of Scotland at 7. With me, Gordon Ross, in the studio tonight. I'm also joined via Skype by Chris McCusker, who is, of course, on the socialist group of the SNP. Welcome back, Chris.
Good evening, Gordon. How are we?
Well, I'm fine, Chris. Unfortunately, a large number of people aren't, so I'm going to go through the statistics for the coronavirus first this evening. Chris, we'll talk about that in a wee minute. Okay, so first of all, as of 2 p.m. today in Scotland, there has been a total of 24,036 Scottish tests concluded, and of these, 20,075 tests have been confirmed negative. That means that 3,961 tests were positive. This marks an increase of 255 confirmed cases since yesterday. The number of patients in Scotland who have died from complications caused by coronavirus has sadly risen to 222. The Scottish figures will be subject to adjustment when outstanding data becomes available. The latest UK figures available show that 5,373 patients who tested positive for COVID-19 have sadly died from their illness. A total of 208,837 people have been tested, of which 157,229 were negative and 51,608 were confirmed positive. So as usual, Chris, the numbers are still climbing as expected, I think. We are now into what's generally assumed to be the steepest part of the rise in cases. This is the so-called high point, I think, of the curve, as they call it. I don't know if you've noticed this yourself, Chris, but I'm beginning to hear more stories about people I know or family members who know other people who've actually come down with the virus now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It is also wise to point out the fact that these figures are now the revised figures, and they take into consideration not just the amount who have died in hospital, but also out of hospital as a result of the coronavirus.
And of course, Chris, I think 13 residents from a care home in Glasgow had died in 1 week. This week we heard as well, didn't we?
I think it was actually 16, Gordon.
Was it 16? I beg your pardon.
Yeah, it's really, really shocking, and it highlights how vulnerable care homes are without PPE.
Yeah, of course, people in care homes, it's very difficult to segregate them, although they have their own rooms. There are lots of common areas. And somebody with dementia, for example, might find it very difficult to understand why they're not allowed to sit with their friends or to watch television in company.
Yeah, well, you know, I mean, as you know, I look after my elder brother who has got mental illness. And although he's fairly lucid, I constantly, when I'm in his house, I've always got to tell him to keep his distance. You know, he's a very insecure chap. He's very tactile. He always needs a reassurance of a hug and things like that. And you know, trying to spell out to him the whole issue of keeping your distance and all the rest of it, it's very, very hard.
Well, at the beginning of this conversation, Chris, I was just saying, you know, we're now beginning to notice people that we know or family members, extended family members who are being affected by the disease. But today we found out that Boris Johnson, the Prime Minister, has actually now been taken to hospital to undergo tests after suffering persistent coronavirus symptoms for more than 10 days. But the government has said that he's in good spirits and still in charge. Johnson, who's 55, tested positive for the virus on March the 26th and was taken to St Thomas's Hospital in central London on Sunday night for routine tests with what Downing Street described as mild and then persistent symptoms. His spokesman Johnson, the government said, was still in charge of the government. On the advice of my doctor, I went into hospital for some routine tests as I'm still experiencing coronavirus symptoms, Johnson said on Twitter. I'm in good spirits and keeping in touch with my team as we work together to fight this virus and to keep everyone safe. Johnson, who had been isolating in Downing Street, had a comfortable night in the hospital and remained there under observation, his spokesman said. It's not immediately clear how an ill Prime Minister could lead the government's response to the outbreak from a hospital. And there is uncertainty about what is meant by precautionary tests for COVID-19 complications. Doctors said a person of Johnson's age with COVID-19 symptoms after 10 days was likely to be assessed for their oxygen levels, their lung, liver and kidney functions, and undergo electrocardiogram heart checks. The UK government has no formal succession plan should the Prime Minister become incapacitated, although the Foreign Secretary Dominic Raab, 46, chaired the government's emergency COVID-19 meeting today. While the government said that Raab would continue to chair the daily meeting while Johnson was in hospital, some in the Conservative Party called for him to formally step in for the Prime Minister until he was better. Raab should formally deputise for Johnson until he's back to his normal swashbuckling self, said Paul Goodman, the editor of Conservative Home website. There are already problems which the Prime Minister's illness will intensify. President Donald Trump said that Johnson was a strong man and that all Americans were praying for him. The pound fell against the dollar on news of his admission to hospital, which occurred just as Queen Elizabeth was speaking on television. On March the 27th, Johnson became the first leader of a major power to announce that he had tested positive and went into isolation in an apartment in Downing Street. Clearly, the Prime Minister is finding it difficult to shake this thing off, said Jonathan Ball, Professor of Molecular Virology at Nottingham University. Medics said that patients with COVID-19 can deteriorate after about 10 days, with some developing pneumonia. National Health Service guidelines advise those who are self-isolating not to go to hospital unless they develop new symptoms or become sufficiently unwell. Johnson has faced criticism for initially approving much more modest response to the novel coronavirus outbreak than other European leaders, saying on March the 3rd that he had been shaking hands with coronavirus patients. He changed tack when scientific projections showed that 250,000 people could die in the United Kingdom. On Sunday, health officials said that Britain's death toll stood at 4,934. The virus, though, had already penetrated the British government. Johnson and his health minister tested positive last month, and his chief medical advisor also self-isolated. Johnson's pregnant 32-year-old fiancée, Carrie Symonds, also had symptoms, but said on Sunday that she was feeling better. So here we are, Chris. The government is heavily infected with the very virus that they're actually trying to combat. And Mr. Johnson appears to be, well, at least on the cusp of perhaps a longer hospital stay. We're not really sure at this point what these tests will prove.
Well, questions were asked last week. Well, not last week. 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, when Parliament was last sitting, questions were asked about the proximity that ministers were taking up on the front bench, and nobody seemed to test that argument for any further. But the wider question here is that if you're a managing director of a multi-million-pound company, then obviously you would delegate your responsibilities to your deputy.
Yeah, of course. I mean, in America, they have a deputy president. So we don't have a deputy prime minister. We haven't had one since Nick Clegg, have we?
Well, no. But then that was obviously due to coalition. But yeah, it clearly shows how anarchic the whole setup is in Westminster to deal with these things. I mean, God forbid. And honestly, I make this point. It would be a travesty if Johnson was to actually die from this. Yeah. And what then comes out of that? I mean, obviously.
Well, some kind of power vacuum, Chris.
We shout for a general election. Because Dominic Raab would be an unelected Prime Minister. Yeah,
I've also heard that that Michael Gove was in the frame as well as a potential replacement for Mr. Johnson if that was necessary. But I think that is just at the moment somebody's preference rather than an actual policy.
Yeah,
Chris, I'm going to move on now to our second story this evening, which is, of course, about Scotland's Chief Medical Officer, Catherine Calderwood, who last night resigned because of the fallout from her family visits to her holiday home in Earls Ferry in Fife over the last 2 weekends, when the official advice fronted by her was to stay at home. Despite her apology in yesterday's media briefing, the press pack seemed determined not to let the story go until they had her scalp, and her resignation was announced just before 10 p.m. last night. Chris, this has been a very fast-breaking story. Catherine Calderwood really seemed to put her foot in it here, having already said that everyone should stay at home and not make any unnecessary journeys, to then go and make 2 unnecessary journeys to her holiday home. Seems to be probably one of the biggest political gaffes this year.
Yeah. My Twitter account has been in meltdown today, and I wasn't defending Catherine Calderwood at all. I was merely questioning as to why the Sun reporters were actually out hiding in bushes and chasing her.
I guess some people, Chris, would say they were doing their job as journalists.
But are they jobs? Are they jobs counted as frontline services?
Apparently, they are key service workers, Chris. Yeah, they are needed to bring. Part of the democratic state that we supposedly live in is the ability of the press to have freedom to operate, I suppose.
So if it was a reporter from the National, it would be more acceptable and more palatable to the nationalist narrative. Look, I'm not defending her. 2 wrongs don't make a right.
No, she made a mistake.
Yes, she made mistakes. She went against the advice that she was giving the country. Yes, it's correct that she should be reprimanded. But should recrimination not come later, after we have this?
I think the question is, Chris, would the disruption caused by a continuing controversy about her remaining not be worse than perhaps having a clean break and bringing another medical expert in?
Yeah, it's very possible. But at the end of the day, what we have to do is take Nicola Sturgeon's advice. And she was more than happy with the clinical and medical advice that Catherine Calderwood was giving her. She was more than happy to retain her services. By all means, take her out in front of camera, put her in the back room, and all the rest of it. But why give into the bait of the media?
Yeah, well, Chris, of course, when the person who is actually giving out these rules, who's actually helped to formulate them, becomes a victim of them and becomes the story herself, then really it must be time for her to step aside and let somebody else do the job. But the question is, the media has obviously kept her in the spotlight for a long period of time under a great deal of pressure, and eventually she's decided to go. We know that Nicola Sturgeon was reluctant to let her go. I think values her expertise greatly, and didn't want the disruption of losing this key figure from her advisor group.
Yeah, and listen, the wider question here that I keep coming back to is the involvement of the unionist media. Like she was naive, to say the least, in her actions. She didn't really fully comprehend the ramifications.
I think, Chris, it's quite easy to rationalise an action like this, where you think, well, we're all in the car together. We're not seeing anybody. We're not coming into contact with anybody. There's no harm done. But at the same time, when you're putting out a message that everyone else should stay at home, this will be judged, I take it, by the public as hypocrisy.
Well, yeah, but she is not alone in this. You look at the amount of people that were occupying the Commons and the seafronts down in London.
Yep. Well, the thing is, Chris, the people who
barbecuing, what have you. There's only so many things that you can say to so many people. But listen, I'll make one really major point here.
Okay.
My elder son lives in Dundee, And he messaged me last week and said, "Oh, Dad, I'm really, really lonely. I'm getting very depressed. I'm thinking about possibly coming through and staying with you so that I can get to see his mum, who lives somewhere else, and obviously his younger sister." And I said, "By all means, son, I'll come through and I'll get you, but you will need to self-isolate for 7 days before I let you out into general population."
Yeah, well, those are the rules as they stand at the moment, Chris, of course.
Yeah, but
anyway, Chris,
one's mental health and well-being outweighs far anything else than anybody at a governmental level could ever try to tell me.
It's a potential minefield, isn't it? Anyway, Chris, I'm going to move on a little bit now, since we did start a little bit late this evening, to the Emergency Coronavirus Scotland Bill, which has received royal assent. The Constitution Secretary, the Scottish Government, Michael Russell, has said that Scotland is facing an unprecedented situation. This emergency bill that has now become law was unanimously passed by the Scottish Parliament and delivers necessary powers so that we can prioritise tackling the coronavirus pandemic. Many businesses and people struggling financially because of the crisis will now receive vital practical help. In particular, we must have a criminal justice system that can operate effectively while treating all those involved, including victims, fairly. The nation is pulling together during these difficult times, and the Scottish Government will continue to engage across parties to help us get through the coming months. So the Scottish Government has now put in place a piece of legislation, Chris, which gives it the powers that it requires when it assumes to fine people who disobey the rules which have been given. For example, the very same rules that Catherine Calderwood was accused of breaking are now coming into law. What effect does that have, Chris, do you think, on the government's ability to control the situation now?
Where do I send my money, Gordon? Does that apply to Prince Charles then? Is he going to get fined?
Well, that was a question. Somebody else did a comparison recently that Prince Charles knew he was infected and travelled with his retinue to Scotland against the advice of the CIO.
Does it also apply to Murdo Fraser and Glenn Smith, who went up skiing at the top of Ben Vorlich?
Yes, there is a story actually circulating at the moment about some Tory MSPs, I think, including Murdo Fraser, doing a little bit of mountaineering just before the big lockdown.
This actually happened when we knew that we were dealing with a pandemic, and as government ministers, they must have known what was coming down the line. And therefore should be leading by example. So
there can't be one rule.
Of sauce for the goose there, you know. Yeah,
of course there can't be one rule for everybody and a completely different set of rules for those who are in charge.
Well, exactly. Yeah, you know what I mean. When a referee witnesses a foul and he lets the play go on, you know, 5 minutes later he goes back and effectively gives a card for it.
Well, the bill apparently has a far more wide-reaching capabilities than just that, Chris, I understand, but we don't have a copy of it here at the moment. But it does certainly enable the Scottish Government to make emergency payments for the first time, and I think that is something it's not been able to do before now. But anyway, Chris, just talking about...
part of that bill as well, thing that I need to point out, that it also enables councils who have a far bigger reach towards companies who are flagrantly disobeying the law by making people work and essentially telling them that if they don't work, then they are out of a job. And they must, this has been fed in along with the SNP Trade Union Group and the STUC, that this must be to involve trade councils who actually work inside, alongside normal district councils and try and bring these unscrupulous employees to account.
Of course, Chris, the bill also protects the rights of people who are renting accommodation and protects them from being evicted during this period as well. That's
correct,
private renters.
I mean, we have heard of stories where actually Shelter Scotland have actually got a very powerful advert out at the moment asking for money, and they actually cite an NHS worker who was threatened with eviction.
Yeah, I have seen that advert, Chris. It is a very powerful message.
It's a very, very powerful advert, that.
Well, I'm just going to change tack now, Chris. We're moving to Ireland for our next story. And this is news that the Irish Taoiseach, Leo Varadkar, is having to work 1 day a week now as a doctor. Leo Varadkar is to work 1 day a week as a doctor to help combat the coronavirus pandemic after reactivating his medical credentials. Ireland's Taoiseach has offered his services to the Health Service Executive, the HSE, in areas that are within his competence, a spokesman for his office said on Sunday. Dr. Varadkar has joined the medical register last month, the spokesman told The Guardian. He has offered his services to the HSE for 1 session a week in areas that are within his scope of practice. Many of his family and friends are working in the health service, and he wanted to help out even in a small way. Varadkar, who's 41, worked as a junior doctor in Dublin and qualified as a GP in 2010 before quitting medicine to become a full-time politician and later becoming Premier. Last month, the HSE appealed to all healthcare professionals who are not already working in the public health service to register to be on call for Ireland. Thousands of nurses, doctors, medical students and others have responded, some coming out of retirement and others flying back from abroad. The Irish Times, which first reported the story, said the Taoiseach was understood to be doing phone assessments in keeping with the protocol to advise people who could be infected over the phone rather than in person. Varadkar's father, Ashok, an Indian immigrant, was a GP and his mother, Miriam, was a nurse. His partner, Matthew Barrett, is a cardiologist. He has won plaudits from across the political spectrum for his handling of the coronavirus crisis. Ireland adopted early restrictions and appears to have avoided an unmitigated pandemic, although cases are expected to surge this week. Varadkar succeeded Enda Kenny in 2017 as the leader of Fine Gael, a centrist party, and as Taoiseach. He earned praise for his handling of the economy and Brexit talks, but in a general election in February, voters punished the party for failures in housing and healthcare. Varadkar was expected to run a caretaker administration before leading Fine Gael into opposition. However, Sinn Féin, which won more votes than any other party, has not formed a governing coalition. Fine Gael and another centrist party, Fianna Fáil, are in talks to form a historic coalition that would see Varadkar rotate the position of Taoiseach with the Fianna Fáil leader Michael Martin. So Mr Varadkar, Chris, seems to be a very busy man at the moment. He is about to kind of stop being the full-time Taoiseach, become a part-time doctor, and then also to become a part-time Taoiseach again. What a life that man must have.
Aye, well, you know, I mean, obviously his skills for the organisation must be absolutely 100%.
Indeed.
You know, to know where he is from one day to the next.
Well, it must be some juggling act.
Yeah. He's not obviously the only politician to have taken the call from the NHS to go back into the front line. I would presume that Dr. Philippa is also doing something down in Ayrshire.
Yes, I think she's isolated at the moment, Chris. But anyway, it'd be interesting to draw a comparison between the Irish Premier and the British Premier in the way that they've approached the virus. Do you talk to us a little bit, Chris, about how you think the Taoiseach has done things differently from Mr. Johnson?
I was just going to call you Kenny there, Gordon. There's no comparison.
I'm not bald enough, Chris.
There is no comparison between Leo Varadkar, and I'm no great fan of Leo Varadkar, to be honest with you. He's a centrist politician, but you know, compared to Boris Johnson, it's chalk. Hey, he's a very proactive prime minister, he's for the right and wrong reasons. He's progressing his country well, and he's very popular in Europe.
Yeah, I think he's regarded in Europe, Chris, as a very safe pair of hands by European politicians. He's well liked there, I think.
It's interesting that this pincer movement on Sinn Féin, these decisive politics, are still prevalent within, the island of Ireland, and it's just a sheer hatred for Sinn Féin.
It has, but it's brought Ireland to a sort of balance point between those who are in favour of reunification and those who think that it would be a step too far at the moment.
And it's, but then Sinn Féin have only got themselves to blame, had they have fielded a lot more candidates, they might have been...
they could have been forming a government by now, I guess. Yeah. Chris, while we're comparing countries, our next item actually looks at Norway and their handling of the coronavirus. The COVID-19 epidemic is under control in Norway, the Nordic country's health minister said on Monday, pointing to a low rate of transmission of the disease. A person carrying the novel coronavirus in Norway contaminates now, on average, 0.7 other people. Bent Høie told the news conference. The government's goal was to limit the spread to a maximum of one other person. The government will decide on Wednesday whether to extend ongoing restrictions, including closures of schools and nurseries, beyond mid-April. Now, this struck me as an unusual one, Chris, because we don't hear an awful lot about what's happening in Norway with the pandemic. But according to this, the rate of contagion is very low, 0.7 people it is being transferred to on average. It's interesting I wonder what it is that the Norwegians are doing differently, Chris. Have you any information?
I have no insight into this, and one can only surmise, or one could possibly cite that maybe the climate isn't conducive to the virus.
Well, certainly, Chris, I think Norway, a little bit like the Highlands of Scotland, is a fairly rugged geography, and people may be more scattered across the countryside rather than being in large cities. It could well be that there's something to do with it.
I was also going to then lead on and say, but, it's quite funny that there seems to be very few figures coming out of Russia. If you're looking at sort of like climate-wise and all the rest, then but it really is a strange one, and I've often said that going along with Leslie Ridder, who is absolutely fantastic in her analysis of the Nordic countries. I think that we would have been better cited to have shared information and best practice with them rather than the British government.
Well, we are, Chris, sorry to cut you off just at the end of this item. We are actually moving back closer to home now for the next story. And this is actually concerning the construction industry in the United Kingdom. Work on construction sites, unless it is for essential projects, should stop immediately, as confirmed in new guidance for the construction industry. The guidance makes clear that work on construction projects should cease unless it is supporting crucial work during the coronavirus pandemic. Any project deemed essential can only continue operating if it can comply with guidance on social distancing and on safety and welfare during the COVID-19 outbreak. Any site unable to meet these requirements should close. Essential projects include those to create or repurpose facilities which will be used directly in COVID-19 related activities, or projects to create or repurpose facilities which will be used to accommodate key workers or to free up space in facilities to be used directly in COVID-19 related activities. Also, projects which are considered essential public services or the repair and maintenance of critical infrastructure. Now, the Economy Secretary Fiona Hislop has said that we recognise that this is an extremely difficult time for businesses of all kinds, but the Scottish Government's priority is saving lives and fighting COVID-19. To this end, all construction sites should close unless they are essential to the health and welfare of the country during the crisis. I want to make clear our thanks to the construction workers who are continuing to work on in these essential projects. This guidance offers clear and comprehensive advice on how the industry should respond in these unprecedented and difficult times. I'm grateful to the Scottish Trades Union Council, Unite the Union and Construction Scotland for their input. In this public health emergency, it's vital that businesses act responsibly and align fully with the social distancing measures introduced to protect the nation's health, well-being and economic future. Now, Chris, as a man myself who has worked with tools and in the sort of trades, I'm finding it very difficult to imagine how a lot of building work could continue when people are having to keep at least 2 metres away from one another.
Yeah, I would wholly agree with you, Gordon.
Especially at break times, Chris. If you're working a building site in poor weather, people tend to go into a hut or some other kind of shelter to have their breaks, and often they're in very close proximity.
They will just need to space themselves out between bus shelters and stuff like that along the road in which they're working. But I think that this advice was given last week, that which was in comparison to the British government, that they were happy to let building sites carry on.
Yeah.
The bigger question for me is, and this is actually directly challenging the government, is that on that provision of that building work could continue.
Yeah.
If it's vital importance, then could they not then concentrate all their efforts on getting the Children's Hospital in Edinburgh up and running as soon as possible?
Yeah, that is obviously a high priority. That work, I understand, Chris, is actually still ongoing as we speak.
Yeah, many hands make light work, Gordon. You know that.
Indeed. Well, Chris, moving on to really, this is a story that's very unusual. Although it's related to coronavirus, it affects a group of individuals who are often, sadly, forgotten about by society. And this story is about supporting people who are affected by alcohol and drug use. Extra support for people affected by alcohol and drug use during the coronavirus pandemic has been announced by the Minister for Public Health, Joe Fitzpatrick. Funding a £166,000 from the Scottish Government, it will support a programme to increase access to Naxalone and in new settings, including investment in kits to the existing outlets for Naxalone supply. Also, increased capacity within the Know the Score helpline and web chat service, a COVID-19 publicity campaign signposting support for alcohol and drug use during the pandemic, and funding to link people with others in recovery through the Scottish Recovery Consortium. The help will also be available for those affected by another person's alcohol and drug use through Supporting Families Fund, and this includes discretionary emergency fund for families for online wellbeing activities, family meals, wellbeing packs and counselling support. Mr. Fitzpatrick said, responding to the coronavirus pandemic is one of the biggest challenges of our lifetime, and it will disrupt so many lives like never before. Protecting and supporting everyone during these unprecedented times is our priority. So we've worked closely with organisations on the front line to create this package of measures to ensure that we continue to support those affected by alcohol and drug use. By working together and observing the latest guidance, we can all play a part in keeping everyone safe. Now again, Chris, this is a story which I think came as a little bit of a surprise to me, and I guess it might come as a surprise to our viewers as well to know that that the Scottish Government is looking after people with alcohol problems and drug addiction issues.
Yeah, but they are supporting. They have recognised that people within our society who have got a dependency on alcohol and drugs, they need support as well, because when you are dependent on drugs and alcohol, your motivational skills, your depression, all affects your mood, and it leads you to take more alcohol and more drugs. So whilst the Scottish Government at this moment in time, I understand, are trying to get our homeless people off of the streets, which the majority, not all, of our homeless have got drug and alcohol addiction issues.
Chris, I understand. Chris, we reported on a story last week in which the Scottish Government, at least anyway, I think, was offering homeless people unused student accommodation, another accommodation which was empty at the moment, so that they would have somewhere safe to self-isolate without having to sleep on the streets.
Yeah. They had that, and I think they were in the process of some local hotels and stuff like that in various areas. And I made the point last week when we were discussing this issue, is that when you can get these people off of the streets and into accommodation, that's the best time to give them this support.
Yeah. Because they're in a protected environment, Chris, at that point. Yes.
Sorry,
I'm saying that would be a good time because they're in a protected environment where they can be treated properly.
Yeah, but it's not. It can't be used as a sticking plaster, no. Gordon. It's got to be an ongoing treatment, and that isn't just the psychological treatment and the drug treatment that they're giving these people. It has to be followed up with social support. It has to be followed up with housing support.
Well, I mean, there's the potential, I suppose, Chris, that if these poor people remain on the streets, that we can end up with a kind of reservoir of infection, of another sort of strain of the infection affecting street people. But the same infection basically being passed between rough sleepers.
That's the exact point that I'm making, Gordon, is because these people, as we often refer to, and I say, unfortunately, we do not refer to them as human beings.
Yeah,
they are humans as well.
Indeed.
And they are victims sometimes of their own downfall, sometimes of their own surroundings and all the rest of it. Yeah. At the end of the day, they are humans and they need help just as much as anyone else in society.
Well, Chris, I'm going to move on from this story to something less to do with the pandemic and of a more political nature. And that is the announcement today that Ian Murray MP, the lone Labour MP in Scotland, has now been appointed the Shadow Scottish Secretary in Keir Starmer's New Look Parliamentary Labour Party. Now, I understand, Chris, because I remember the history of this, at least basically, that Ian Murray pretty much refused to serve as Scottish Secretary under Jeremy Corbyn's leadership. He wouldn't work with Corbyn.
That's correct, yeah, because he's a Blairite.
He's a Blairite, so he's very much more on the centre-right of the party, I think you would say.
Yeah, definitely.
But also a very fierce unionist.
Oh, rabid.
Very, very much anti-independence, Mr. Murray.
Rabid, absolutely. Fervent unionist.
So many sort of commentators and pundits today are basically interpreting this move as Keir Starmer sort of putting his foot down and saying there's not going to now be a Scottish referendum if the Labour Party were in charge of the United Kingdom.
Well, it's a belt and braces job by the British establishment, to be fair, because now you've got the Secretary of State, who is obviously a rabid unionist. You've now got the Shadow Secretary of State, who is also a rabid unionist. So therefore...
Well, since he's the only Scottish MP left, Chris, from a pro-UK party, Starmer had no reason not to appoint him. He's basically the only game in town, I suppose.
But was he given the job because he failed in his bid to become?
He, somebody was joking today that he's the number one Scottish MP. He's the top of the heap when it comes to Labour MPs in Scotland.
There are more pandas in the zoo than bloody Murray. Honestly, he might be a very good MP, very popular constituency MP, but he does not represent the vast majority of Scotland. Therefore, he should not be in that job. It's as simple as that. I would much rather have your man that was doing the job a couple of months ago from Newcastle.
You think he was a better choice, Chris? Probably more neutral.
Honestly.
Anyway, listen, I'd like to talk more about this, but we don't have the time, unfortunately, because we're running a little late this evening. But, Chris, we do need to talk about something else important on our next story. And again, this is another call for support from the Scottish Government. This time, the call for support is for home workers, people who have been forced to work from home due to the virus. The Scottish Government should consider what support can be made available for the significantly increased number of people who are working from home during the coronavirus crisis, according to the Scottish Greens connectivity spokesman John Finney, MSP. More people than ever before are working from home as they follow government advice to stay put to slow the spread of the virus and to protect the NHS. Mr Finney has raised concerns that the unexpected shift to home working for many could come with increased costs for households and has lodged parliamentary questions asking the Scottish Government what support can be provided. John Finney, MSP, said, "We live in unprecedented times. The COVID-19 crisis has changed all of our lives, and for many that means working from home. This move to home working will be a first for lots of people and will bring with it lots of concerns. First and foremost, it's vital that employers ensure that they have considered the health and safety of their employees. In practice, this is likely to mean that employers should issue people with appropriate equipment to do their jobs. I've asked the Scottish Government if it will consider issuing updated guidance to businesses on the health and safety for home workers. The cost of home working can often be overlooked, but it may be considerable, especially if the current restrictions are in place for a significant period, as seems likely. Many people have data limits on their broadband usage and increased calling rates at particular times of the day, meaning that they could be accruing additional charges simply for doing their jobs. Other household costs like electricity and gas are also likely to increase as people have the heating and the lights on through the day. For many rural and island communities, the challenge of working at home is compounded by poor broadband connectivity. This is not a new issue, but one that must be addressed. I hope the Scottish Government will acknowledge these concerns and consider what practical support it is able to put in place to back those who are playing their part in the fight against COVID-19 by following the advice and staying at home. What do you think, Chris? Here we have John Finney, who, to be fair to John, often comes up with, I would say, the underdog position on many political decisions. This is one I honestly hadn't considered, but it must be true that if you're working from home, your electricity bills, your gas bills are going to be higher, and obviously if you're doing an office job, your data limit on your home broadband is going to cause you problems.
That's fine and dandy, but I think John Finney's got this wrong. And what I think is the fact that the Scottish Government should be thinking about unpaid carers who are not getting any help whatsoever from the Scottish Government.
Chris, whilst I think everybody would probably agree with you about carers, that they need help, that you can't really set one against the other here. These are like comparing apples and oranges. Where does the Scottish Government put the most money, really, is what this issue seems to be. John Finney has basically said that people living in the Highlands and Islands are going to have a harder time of it because they're so far out and because their broadband connectivity is so poor.
No doubt they are, Gordon, but unpaid carers under the UK government get paid 86 pence an hour to be essentially frontline staff, and we have got no access to PPE. Nobody has actually chapped my door or rung my bell or phone me or send me an email to say, here, Chris, there's some PPE when you go and visit your brother. What other support can we possibly give you, Chris? And by the way, we really, really appreciate you working for 86 pence an hour. Fair play to you, mate.
Well, Chris, I hope that the SNP, who I do know watch this programme, are watching tonight and listening to what you're saying there. I'm sure there'll be somebody on the phone to you eventually about that subject.
Yeah, I've already taken this up with several MPs, and they say that they're on it. But that's an MP.
Yeah, the trouble, I think, Chris, with this is that a lot of this is a Westminster issue. When you're talking about benefits to people who are supporting disabled people at home.
I know, and I concede that, Gordon. What I'm saying is the fact that I think John Finney should be prioritising on other things rather than thinking about. Yes,
I understand what you're saying, Chris. You think but John Finney is not really a spokesperson. It's not his remit and his job, if you like, as the man who deals with things like connectivity in business and rural settings is John Finney.
Yeah, I know people in rural settings are going to be harder hit, and I get it.
Well, of course, anybody working at home, Chris, is going to be hit by the extra bills, yourself included, I guess.
Yeah, they are all valid arguments. All I'm just saying, I'm using this as a platform to.
Yeah. Oh, I think you made a good point, Chris. I'd like to move on now. This is another story involving the SNP. There have been renewed calls for guaranteed income after a Spanish move. The SNP has renewed calls for the UK government to introduce guaranteed minimum income after Spain announced that it would roll out a universal basic income known as UBI as soon as possible to mitigate the impact of coronavirus. Ian Blackford MP said that using tax and welfare system to introduce a guaranteed income for everyone would fix the serious gap in the current support on offer and ensure that nobody is left behind. The SNP's Westminster leader has consistently called for the measure since the coronavirus crisis began. He said it would also be a key measure to consider introducing for the long term to create a fairer and more equal society. In commenting, Mr Blackford MP said the UK government must reconsider its knee-jerk opposition to introducing a guaranteed minimum income for everyone, which would be the simplest way to ensure that no one is left behind during the coronavirus crisis. There are serious gaps in the current UK system, and millions of people are not getting the financial support they need. A guaranteed minimum income for everyone would fix these gaps and put cash into people's pockets. The coronavirus crisis has exposed the deep flaws in the UK government policy and the inequality that is rife in our society. This would be a key measure that could be continued into the long term as part of the enduring fundamental change needed to ensure a strong recovery and to build a fairer society that supports all our people. The SNP will continue to work constructively across parties to secure the support of people need right now and the long-term change needed for a fairer future. Now, Chris, we have talked on this subject before about the idea of a guaranteed minimum basic income for all. Your opinion on this, Chris, at the moment, what do you think? Is it looking more likely that...
Actually, it would answer an awful lot of problems for a lot of people.
Including yourself, Chris.
I actually just said that one thing, Gordon, the SNP Socialists actually had a webinar executive meeting, and out of that we've produced a document which we are hopefully going to garner support from the trade union group and also the Commonweal group. If viewers have a look on the SNP Socialist Twitter account, we have actually published a 10 bullet point policy, and UBI is definitely in there around about third or fourth, I think. We've been arguing this since our inception, since 2016, and we welcome the fact that Ian Blackford has been champion for the last 2 or 3 weeks in response to COVID-19. But the wider implications are, is people have to realise that the Conservative government would never give in to UBI, because in doing that, that would be them embracing socialism, and Conservatives are never going to embrace socialism.
Well, of course, the other element to this, Chris, is the Conservative Party's position on employment, which is that they prefer people to be in work. So making them wealthier without having to work would defeat the purpose of them reducing the amount of benefits that people can currently get. In other words, they have been trying for a number of years to force wages down and to force people into low-paid jobs.
Yeah, it would undo their work that they have systematically taken out, within the last 30 odd years, with regards to the benefit system in the UK, which has actually been cited as one of the worst benefit systems in the whole of the developed world. And that coupled alongside with the pension system.
Well, yeah, we know our pensions are probably the lowest in the Western world at the moment.
Yes, yeah, so I mean, there is absolutely, I mean, don't get me wrong, I've got a hell of a lot of time for Ian. I really do. I got on really, really well with them. I'm afraid that the Tory government are just never going to cave into this at all. This could actually be a template that we can use for a fairer society within an independent Scotland. I just don't see the Tory government taking it on board.
Okay, thanks for that, Chris. Our sort of second from last story this evening, if you like, is actually another one about the Scottish Government providing help for those worst affected by the virus. People most at risk from the impacts of coronavirus outbreak are to receive further support following emergency investment in crucial services. The charities Scottish Women's Aid, Social Bite and other key partners will share up to £8 million to provide an emergency response and to ensure services can react to coronavirus. Disadvantaged groups facing hardships such as homelessness, food insecurity or social isolation and loneliness are among those to benefit from services such as the emergency accommodation in Glasgow and Edinburgh, the provision of food and essential supplies to vulnerable groups in Edinburgh, Glasgow and Aberdeen, for public health information translated into British Sign Language, and the creation of easy one-stop shop approach for BSL users, and also online and telephone support for both older people and young people and more isolated members of the LGBT community to improve mental resilience and well-being. This investment is part of the Scottish Government's wider £350 million communities funding to help those most affected by the pandemic. Welcoming the projects, the Communities Secretary Aileen Campbell said, we are facing an unprecedented situation that requires a practical response at scale and at pace. To help people most at risk in our community, we must do all that we can to protect the health, the welfare and well-being of the people of Scotland. These significant national investments are helping to strengthen the support available to individuals and ensuring that key services are available for those most in need. We are continuing to work with partners, including community organisations, to ensure that funding reaches those best placed to provide service. Now, Chris, again, this is, I suppose, another government good story where the SNP is taking action to support charities, basically, during the crisis.
Yeah, well, I think actually we should have been discussing this item when I was having my rant about homeless people, because it highlights the fact that, or should I say, it reinforces the fact that the Scottish Government are doing something to help the most vulnerable within our society. And that's just not narrowing it down to people with drug addiction or alcohol addiction. There are many people in our society who suffer from, as I say, depression and suicide, and even people who feel socially isolated through.
Well, of course, yeah, isolation is obviously going to make these people even more vulnerable to such things, Chris.
Well, this is exactly what I was saying.
Well, Chris, listen. We have more to this story. as I say, the investment is £350 million. It's quite a substantial sum of money compared to some of the other assistance packages that I've been outlining tonight on the news. This one seems to be the largest of them all.
Well, I mean, you know, it is a bigger problem, and you know that problem has to be, as I say, from my own experience, my youngest,
okay,
he was doing his internship with Shelter Scotland, and they had to shut the office down at the start of the pandemic. It's service that it was able to give to the homeless people in Aberdeen. So they definitely, you know, people like that, charities like that, you know, definitely need as much help as we possibly can. Reinforce the point that I said earlier is that you know we are all human beings. We are all you know struggling through this whole crisis together. And you know, to be honest with you, as far as I can see, the Scottish Government are not willing to leave other people behind. And that is in stark contrast with the UK government, who have quite happily adopted the health community.
Okay, Chris, we're just coming towards the end of the show now, but before we actually leave for this evening, I just wanted to mention that following Broadcasting Scotland's very successful 700 live Ceilidh on Saturday to mark the Arbroath 700th anniversary, we've decided to invest in increasing our remote production capacity so that we can do more remote events. And by increasing our fibre connection to 1 gigabyte and installing a new production computer. And this will involve an investment of about £3,000, which will transform the way that we connect to remote guests and increase the number that we connect to simultaneously. So, of course, that is going to cost money. And usually at this time in the evening, at the end of the show, is my traditional moment for asking you to lend your support to Broadcasting Scotland. And with the advent of this new computer, new equipment, and new broadband connection, we are going to need your help more than ever before. So if you would like to help by becoming a regular contributor and supporter of Broadcasting Scotland, you can do so by following the instructions on your screen now. So to support Broadcasting Scotland, go to www.broadcastingscotland.scot/register and follow the prompts. Or you can go to the main page and donate there. Anyway, that is about all we have time for this evening. I'm sorry we were running a little bit late earlier on due to a technical problem. But we are not finishing with our usual music this evening. We are, in fact, going to finish with the Declaration of Arbroath, which, of course, is officially today is the exact anniversary of that. But Chris, I was just talking there about the new improvements being made in Broadcasting Scotland, where we will be able to have multiple conversations with more people in remote places like yourself.
Yeah. Well, you know, I thoroughly enjoyed the programme on Saturday, and as you can see, I'm holding my banjo here.
I noticed that, Chris. You're not threatening to play it, are you?
Very, very rusty at this moment in time, Gordon. But you know, everybody's up.
Give us a few bars of something, Chris.
Few bars. Honestly, my fingers are absolutely jiggered. I couldn't manage anything with any complete confidence. But I did say to my comrade Greg McCara that once I'm fully confident and back up to full speed again, we'll have to have a wee session of dueling banjos or something like that.
Well, that would be fun. Okay. Well, listen, Chris. We're about to stream the Declaration of Arbroath. This is a reading by Kat Harrison of the Declaration of Arbroath. I mentioned this actually in my own blog in the last couple of days. The significance of this date. This is the 700th anniversary on this day exactly. In fact, 700 years ago in 1320, this document was signed by dozens of nobles and gentry, not to mention the burghers and the other landholders of Scotland. What does the Declaration mean to you, Chris, do you think?
Well, to be honest with you, I don't like referring to it as a declaration. I prefer to call it a treaty because it is essentially a treaty that was countersigned by Rome. You know, the historical significance of that document means that we were actually recognised as an independent country long before we were colonised by the United Kingdom.
Indeed, 400 years before.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, I think more should be made of it. And I'm hoping that next year, after we've been through the effects of COVID-19, the 701st anniversary of the Declaration of Arbroath, or the Treaty of Arbroath, you know, we'll be able to celebrate that in the fitting way that you know, a good Scottish tribute could be held.
Okay, well, let's hope that happens, Chris. In the meantime, we are going to be played out by Kat Harrison reading the famous Declaration aloud. So that's it from Broadcasting Scotland tonight, and I will let Kat Harrison finish the programme. From me here in the studio and from Chris at home, a very good night to you all.
The Lord John, by divine providence, Supreme Pontiff of the Holy Roman and Universal Church, of Man and Annandale, Patrick Dunbar, Earl of March, Malise, Earl of Strathearn, Malcolm, Earl of Lennox, William, Earl of Ross, Magnus, Earl of Caithness and Orkney, and William, Earl of Sutherland, Walter, Steward of Scotland, William Soulis, Butler of Scotland, James, Lord of Douglas, Roger Mowbray, David, Lord of Brechin, David Graham, Ingram Umfraville, John Menteith, Guardian of the Earldom of Menteith, Alexander Fraser, Gilbert Hay, Constable of Scotland, Robert Keith, Marshal of Scotland, Henry Sinclair, John Graham, David Lindsay, William Oliphant, Patrick Graham, John Fenton, William Abernathy, David Wemyss, William Mushet, Fergus of Ardrossan, Eustace Maxwell, William Ramsay, William Mowat, Alan Murray, Donald Campbell, John Cameron, Reginald Chen, Alexander Seaton, Andrew Leslie and Alexander Straighton, and the other barons and freeholders and the whole community of the realm of Scotland send all manner of filial reverence with devout kisses of his blessed feet. Most Holy Father, we know, and from the chronicles and books of the ancients we find that, among other famous nations, our own, the Scots, has been graced with widespread renown. It journeyed from Greater Scythia by way of the Tyrrhenian Sea and the Pillars of Hercules, and dwelt for a long course in time in Spain among the most savage peoples. But nowhere could it be subdued by people, however barbarous. Thence it came 1200 years after the people of Israel crossed the Red Sea to its home in the west, where it still lives today. The Britons it first drove out, the Picts it utterly destroyed, and even though very often assailed by the Norwegians, the Danes and the English, it took possession of that home with many victories and untold efforts. And as the histories of old time bear witness, they have held it free of all servitude ever since. In their kingdom there have reigned 113 kings of their own royal stock, the line unbroken by a single foreigner. The high qualities and merits of these people, were they not otherwise manifest, shine forth clearly enough from this, that the King of Kings and Lord of Lords, our Lord Jesus Christ, after his passion and resurrection, called them, even though settled in the uttermost parts of the earth, almost the first to his most holy faith. Nor did he wish them to be confirmed in that faith by merely anyone, but by the first of his apostles. By calling, though second or third in rank, the most gentle Saint Andrew, the blessed Peter's brother, and desired him to keep them under his protection as their patron forever. The most holy fathers, your predecessors, gave careful heed to these things, and strengthened the same kingdom and people with many favours and numerous privileges, as being the special charge of the blessed Peter's brother. Thus our people, under their protection, did indeed live in freedom and peace, up to the time when that mighty prince, the King of the English, Edward, the father of the one who reigns today, when our kingdom had no head, and our people harboured no malice or treachery, and were then unused to wars or invasions, came in a guise of a friend and ally to harass them as an enemy. The deeds of cruelty, massacre, violence, pillage, arson, imprisoning prelates, burning down monasteries, robbing and killing monks and nuns, and yet other outrages without number, which he committed against our people, sparing neither age nor sex, religion nor rank. No one could describe nor fully imagine, unless he had seen them with his own eyes. But from these countless evils, we have been set free by the help of him who, though he afflicts, yet heals and restores, by our most tireless Prince, King and Lord, the Lord Robert. He, that his people and his heritage might be delivered out of the hands of our enemies, bore cheerfully toil and fatigue, hunger and peril, like another Maccabeus or Joshua. Him too, divine providence, the succession to his right, according to our laws and customs, which we shall maintain to the death, and to the due consent and assent of us all have made our Prince and King. To him, as to the man by whom salvation has been wrought unto our people, we are bound both by his right and by his merits, that our freedom may be still maintained, and by him, come what may, we mean to stand. Yet, if he should give up what he has begun, seeking to make us or our kingdom subject to the King of England, or the English, we should exert ourselves at once to drive him out as our enemy and a subverter of his own right and ours, and make some other man who is well able to defend us our king. For as long as 100 of us remain alive, never will we on any conditions be subjected to the lordship of the English. It is in truth not for glory, nor riches, nor honours that we are fighting, but for freedom alone, which no honest man gives up but with life itself. Therefore it is, Reverend Father and Lord, that we beseech your holiness with our most earnest prayers and suppliant hearts, inasmuch as you will in your sincerity and goodness consider all this, that since with him whose vicegerent on earth you are, there is neither weighing nor distinction of Jew and Greek, Scotsman or Englishman, you will look with the eyes of a father on the troubles and privations brought by the English upon us and upon the Church of God. May it please you to admonish and exhort the King of the English, who ought to be satisfied with what belongs to him, since England used once to be enough for 7 kings or more, to leave us Scots in peace, who live in this poor little Scotland, beyond which there is no dwelling place at all, and covet nothing but our own. We are sincerely willing to do anything for him, having regard to our condition, that we can, to win peace for ourselves. This truly concerns you, Holy Father, since you see the savagery of the heathen raging against the Christians, as the sins of the Christians have indeed deserved, and the frontiers of Christendom being pressed inward every day, and how much it will tarnish your Holiness's memory if, which God forbid, the Church suffers eclipse or scandal in any branch of it during your time, you must perceive. Then rouse the Christian princes who for false reasons pretend that they cannot go to the help of the Holy Land because of wars they have in hand with their neighbours. The real reason that prevents them is that in making war on their smaller neighbours, they find a readier advantage and weaker resistance. But how cheerfully our Lord the King and we too would go there if the King of the English would leave us in peace. He from whom nothing is hidden well knows, and we profess and declare it to you as the Vicar of Christ and to all Christendom. But if your Holiness puts too much faith in the tales the English tell, and will not give sincere belief to all this, nor refrain from favouring them to our undoing, then the slaughter of bodies, the perdition of souls, and all the other misfortunes that will follow, inflicted by them on us, and by us on them, will, we believe, be surely laid by the Most High to your charge. To conclude, we are and shall ever be, as far as duty calls us, ready to do your will in all things, as obedient sons to you as his vicar, and to him as the supreme king and judge, we commit the maintenance of our cause, casting our cares upon him, and firmly trusting that he will inspire us with courage and bring our enemies to nothing. May the Most High preserve you to his holy church in holiness and health for many days to come. Given at the monastery of Arbroath in Scotland on the 6th day of the month of April, in the year of grace 1320, and the 15th year of the reign of our King aforesaid.
Okay, we're breaking a story here now. This is an additional broadcast, breaking news tonight. Boris Johnson, we have just heard, has been moved into an intensive care unit after his condition worsened, Downing Street has said. A Number 10 spokesman said, since Sunday evening, the Prime Minister has been under the care of doctors at St Thomas's Hospital in London after being admitted with persistent symptoms of coronavirus. Over the course of this afternoon, the condition of the Prime Minister has worsened, and on the advice of his medical team, he has been moved to the intensive care unit at the hospital. The Prime Minister has asked the Foreign Secretary, Dominic Raab, who is the First Secretary of State, to deputise for him where necessary. The Prime Minister is receiving excellent care, and thanks to all National Health Service staff for their hard work and dedication. So, Chris, if you're still there, your comment, we have Boris Johnson now in intensive care. This is remarkable news tonight.
Yeah, it's absolutely shocking. And whilst we were playing that piece on the Treaty of Arbroath, it actually flashed across my phone from Sputnik News, believe it or not.
From Sputnik, yeah.
I was absolutely flabbergasted because the UK government today were playing down, as to Boris's condition.
Yeah.
And I honestly doubt that it could have worsened in the space of an afternoon. Dominic Raab took that meeting at 9:15 this morning, and all throughout the day, they were constantly just giving you general updates of, his health and the fact that he was still making key decisions.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden now he's been rushed into intensive care.
It's a strange, Chris, forgive me butting in, it's a strange situation to be in. That there are not many countries in the world at the moment where the leader of the country has got the coronavirus so badly that they're in intensive care. And also, it seems that Britain seems almost unique in the way it responded to the coronavirus initially as well. And this seems almost ironic that Mr. Johnson has been a victim of this virus, which he seemed in the initial stages at least to not take as seriously as perhaps other people might have wished.
Many people were questioning as to why he was taking meetings with a person who was known to have the COVID-19 virus.
Yeah, of course, he was shaking hands, he said, in a hospital with coronavirus patients.
Yeah, so, I mean, has he acted foolishly? Was he fancy-free?
Yeah.
Why was he standing at the door of his house last Thursday applauding the NHS, and letting droplets out into the atmosphere?
Well, I don't think there was anybody within about 50 feet of him, Chris, probably.
But at the end of the day, the advice is the fact that you're to self-isolate, stay inside, and don't open any doors.
Well, Chris, having seen Mr. Johnson's appearance live that night when he was applauding the NHS, he did look ill. I mean, there's no question about it. He did not look himself. He looked very worried, actually. But it does kind of put things into context with regards to Dr. Catherine Calderwood's mistakes and actions recently, when the Prime Minister himself has fallen victim to his own policies on coronavirus.
Yeah,
it seems that way.
and it actually gives you pause for reflection. That that somebody you would think who had access obviously to the best healthcare in the world and stuff like that can still end up in intensive care. And yeah, so there is a lesson taken out of the Catherine Gordon issue. But it has to serve as a warning that this virus knows no borders. It knows no racism.
It crosses all of these boundaries, Chris, doesn't it? Nobody is safe from it
whatsoever, and it is very indiscriminate. And people have just got to be, safe and referencing back again. You have to be your own health and safety officer in these times.
Yeah, I think, Chris, what this tells us all really is that we need to look after each other and look after ourselves a bit better, and to make sure that we don't break these new rules about self-isolation and the lockdown. Because obviously, Mr. Johnson in the early stages of the coronavirus didn't seem to realise how infectious it was, and he's now basically been a victim of his actions at the time.
But Gordon, I want to get one thing clear, by the way. I in no way condone her actions. Twice she broke the law, and and she's paid the ultimate price for it.
Indeed, yeah.
And that's it. There's no getting away from it.
Well, Miss Calderwood has paid with her job, but Mr. Johnson seems to be paying the price with his health.
Well, and this is it. So the bigger story here is not the fact that she's now on the dole, or I presume that she would just take up her previous role in gynecology. But,
well, this is the man who very famously said, that he might want to just let the thing run through the society and would gain herd immunity. But now Mr. Johnson is clearly a victim of this disease. And I think from all of us here in the studio, and yourself, Chris, I'm sure, even though we fundamentally disagree with Mr. Johnson on many things, that everybody here sends their best wishes for a speedy recovery, because despite Mr. Johnson's political affiliations not shared by everybody in Scotland, nobody really would wish this on anyone.
No, I wholeheartedly agree with that, and as I say, but I mean, I think you opened the program tonight with it's a fast moving turn of events that we're being subjected to. And this COVID-19, there'll be another event tomorrow. There'll be another event thereafter.
It's been equated to a sort of tidal wave, Chris, a sort of humongous wave that grows taller every day.
Yeah, I would say a tsunami, to be honest with you, as a biblical proportion.
Well, anyway, we're just about at the end of our time this evening, Chris, but it was a kind of serendipity tonight that we were still almost on the air when this story broke. Yeah. But we have run out of time this evening, and we in the programme send our best wishes to Mr. Johnson for a speedy recovery. We hope he's better very soon. Anyway, from us this evening in the Scotland at 7 studio at a slightly later time of 8:30. I'll see you all again on Monday morning. That's it from Scotland at 7 here in Cowcaddens. We'll see you all again on Monday night. Bye for now.